Newman, you have published, or we published a book by you and Samuel Blumenfeld about education, Crimes of the Educators, a marvelous, marvelous book. And we're no longer publishing. That book is well worth going to Amazon to get. And so you're one of the first people I would ever think of to go to ask this question. And it's about the dissolution of the Department of Education. And of course, you, along with myself and many, many other Americans, have been waiting for the promise to be fulfilled by a Republican president to dissolve the Department of Education, which was not begun until actually at the end of Carter and the beginning of Reagan, and we've been waiting ever since. So they've had 20, 40, 45 years to destroy education in America, and now President Trump is committed with his secretary to essentially dissolve and maybe disperse the things that have to continue to other agencies. I haven't heard much about a working plan, but this is my concern. The state and district level education systems are today as corrupt, nefarious, perverse as any federal government agency could ever have dreamed of being. And so whether or not the cause and effect comes into play here, for instance, if the nationalization or federalization of an education department, funneling money into various departments of education in the 50 states and all the school districts, whether that was the cause of the problem we see today, and I think it probably goes back well before that event took place, but just eliminating the cause, is that really going to eliminate the perverse nature, the destructive nature of government school education on the state and district level, school district level today? And are we taking, so my follow-up, that's there, I'm finally at the question, are we taking out precipitously, I want it gone, but precipitously, the Department of Education's weapon of money, holding these billions of dollars that could be withheld from states that continue in these nefarious programs and systems, and only give them to certain states that meet a criteria that the American people would all agree to. So that's my proposal, and I'm so glad to have you join me today because I know you're going to be brilliant.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate it very much. And this is an issue I've spent a lot of time thinking about, a lot of time working with policymakers on. In fact, Sam Blumenfeld and I did Crimes of the Educators, published by WND Books back in 2014. That was a bestseller, endorsed by Phyllis Schlafly and multiple members of Congress. And since then, I have picked up where Sam left off and done even more research. I just put out a new book last year called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. And that's been endorsed by a lot of great people in Washington, D.C., including, incidentally, our great Secretary of Defense, Peter Hegseth, including people like Roger Stone and Glenn Beck and the founders of Mom for Liberty, and a lot of other great Americans. And what it shows is that, as you just alluded to, Elizabeth, even if we were to shut down the U.S. Department of Education tomorrow, this is not going to be fixed by state and local departments of education. The rot is so deep, it's so systemic, it's so bad. It's kind of like polishing the doorknobs on the Titanic and hoping that the ship is not going to sink. It's going down, right? And the children stuck on it who don't get off into the life rafts are going down with the ship. I don't know how to be more clear about it. And there's a little bit of a which came first, the chicken or the egg. The government education system was already terrible before the federal government came in. But as the federal government came in, that terrible streak got worse. It accelerated. The first real significant federal intervention into education was the Supreme Court, actually, back in the early 1960s, when they kicked out the little bit of Bible and Christianity that still remained in this system. But in my new book, I trace the whole history back of how the government came to control education in the first place. And it's an astounding history. The people who first proposed that the government ought to be educating children were occultists communicating with spirits. They were communists. They were utopians. There were people who rejected the Bible, who rejected the principles that our country was founded on, and who wanted to fundamentally transform it. And they saw the education of children as a means to that end.
That's
They
right.
never saw education as an end in and of itself, that, we want these kids to be well educated. They always saw it as a tool in their arsenal to fundamentally transform society. And obviously, they couldn't just come out early on in the beginning and say, all right, guys, we're going to brainwash all your kids. We're going to force you to send them, and no more Bibles, no more prayer, no more 10 Commandments. We're going to teach your kids transgenderism, right? They would have been tarred and feathered. But over a period of many generations, with the small changes. That's right.
Whittling it away, right? And desensitizing people because they don't remember what the previous generation knew. They have a new set of normal circumstances, and then chipping away at that, they don't notice. And then the next generation looks back, they don't know about this, and you chip away at the new standard that they introduced in the last generation. So it's so incremental. And then, of course, it always ends up in school districts castrating little boys or giving them chemical castration or something like that. And you say, how do we get here? And I say, I've been following this all along. This is where WorldNetDaily, Alex Newman, and so many other in what used to be called the new media back in the days when Joseph and I founded WorldNetDaily in 1997. But I don't think we're new anymore. And I read Charlotte Iserbyt's book, The Dumbing Down of American Education, which is this thick. And I believe I was just looking here a minute ago because I think I had your book, your new book. I'm not sure. I've got to grab it. So many men, including I think Thomas Sowell and others, have written books about this. I want to get your book if I don't have it in my library, because that's the thing to me that's the most important, is when you wake up to see, wait a minute, a particular utopian or group of utopians were saying, we can't make this transformation. This is probably in the very early 1800s with America until we remove their independence. The Americans are so independent-minded, and they say, where did this independence come from? This strong will and sense of self. This is their words. I'm not quoting, obviously, verbatim. It's been years since I read this chapter in whatever book it was. And they said, it's their Christian education. It's their Christian worldview. They're not Europe. They're not any other country that we can manipulate and mold and indoctrinate and propagandize. They're too independent, and they're not going to let go of that Bible and their freedom until we educate it out of them. And they said, so we have to go to the schools and we have to change education to strip away that independent mindset only that comes from having the mind of Christ and the Judeo-Christian scriptures that we rely so heavily on. Is that a good summary of?
It's exactly what happened, Elizabeth. And so actually, chapter 1 in my new book is about a guy called Robert Owen. And I first heard about him from Sam Blumen. He mentions him kind of tangentially in a number of his books. He did 13 books on education, which I bought and read every single one. It's an unbelievable goldmine of information. And he kept mentioning this guy, Robert Owen, just in passing. Like, the guy that came up with the idea that the government should educate kids was Robert Owen. That system took root in Prussia, and then it was reimported into the United States by Massachusetts. So I have spent the last few years, among other projects, digging into Robert Owen. And what you find when you look at this guy is fascinating. His mission in life was to combat what he described as the great trinity of evil. And in his mind, the great trinity of evil was marriage and family, private property, and the church and religion, Christianity. And so he sets up a secret society. And we know a little bit about the secret society because a whistleblower who was involved in it eventually became a Catholic, repented of his involvement there, and spilled the beans. His name was Orestes Brownson. He said that this secret society was modeled on the Carbonari of Europe, especially in Italy, nasty, vile group of people, and that their objective, on the surface at least, was to shift public opinion so that Americans would come to embrace the idea of having the government educate children, and also to get men elected to legislatures who would support the idea of government-funded, government-controlled education. So that was their task. But then Orestes Brownson, in his expose on this operation, who, by the way, he said he was organizing part of New York State for this. So he had intimate knowledge of what they were doing.
Because I remember Orestes Brownson, I remember, of course, Owen, and I think Owen spent some time in England, too. Wasn't he?
He did.
English?
He was from Wales originally. He spent a lot of time in England.
And he set up a commune of sorts, and it ended up, he did it as actually in the Midwest here in America.
That's right.
And it spectacularly failed. And what they found is just like the Pilgrims of Pilgrim's No, not A Pilgrim's Promise. Trying to think of the great history of the Pilgrims written by Governor.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, the Plymouth Plantation.
Plymouth Plantation. I've got it right behind me on that bookshelf. One of my favorite books, but I'm getting old. Anyway, remember how when they had originally, not because they designed it, but because those who sponsored them coming over set up a sort of a communist socialist kind of government where everything was held in common. And then they found that people didn't work. And these are who you would consider to be pretty good people, but the lazy ones wouldn't work. So everyone was hurt by that lack of effort and that laziness. And finally, he said, we thought we were better than God. He didn't really think they thought that, but in other words, this is a kind of a program. He saw so clearly that this was unbiblical. And this is back in the 1600s. Fast forward to Robert Owen, the same thing happened when his colony failed do you remember the state that it was in?
It was in Indiana. It was called New Harmony. You're right. It failed in less than a couple of years because, of course, he was trying to prove the superiority of his ideas that we could be better off without family, without marriage, right? He believed, like Karl Marx, that women should be held in common and people could just have whatever kind of sexual relations they wanted to, right?
I know. Crazy. Please, no. And then it failed, but was it the epitaph? I don't know if Owen said it or somebody else, but probably critical of the mindset that these people are so selfish. They don't want to work together in this communal, utopian, he wouldn't have put it that way, society. So we tried it. It failed. And so they had to, continue going about this program. Let me ask you one quick question as a detail. Were the unions involved with Owen and this early, some labor unions? Weren't they using?
Well, Owens was involved with a lot of different things. He was involved in textile manufacturing. He married into a very wealthy textile manufacturing family, so he had a lot of money. And one of the things he did at his manufacturing facilities was urge women to come in and drop their little children, 2 years old, 3 years old, in these weird social engineering centers masquerading as daycare centers. Really bizarre guy. And you're right, after the stunning failure of his commune, he concluded that the problem wasn't his ideas, right? Obviously, no family and no private property is better. The problem was that the people living in his commune had been brought up in a Christian society, thoroughly saturated with these biblical ideas. And so his conclusion was, we've got to get them when they're young. We've got to have a system that educates them to basically do what the Soviets described as creating the new Soviet man, right? If you can get them when they're young, we can train them and mold them so that they won't be selfish, so that they'll work for the good of the collective, so that they won't have these outdated ideas about marriage and family and God. And that was his mission in life. And so he wrote in his autobiography that Baron Jacobi, this was the ambassador from Prussia, the ambassador picked up copies of his essays. He wrote a series of essays outlining his vision for an education system. And so this Baron Jacobi, he says, took those essays back to the dictator of Prussia. And he said the dictator so much approved of these ideas that he ordered his interior minister to create the first ever system of government so-called education of the state, by the state, and for the state. So that took root in Prussia. And then Horace Mann, who's much better known than Robert Owen, went to Prussia, studied the system, imported it into Massachusetts, And then after he was done in Massachusetts, went around the country like a traveling evangelist preaching the good news of salvation by government schools. And so that's how we ended up with compulsory government education in this country. It was all people who rejected the Bible, who rejected biblical principles, who wanted to fundamentally transform our society, and who had ideas that if they were more widely known would be absolutely abhorrent. And one more thing to say about Robert O., and I alluded to it earlier, Elizabeth. Shortly before he died, he convened what he called the World Congress of the Advanced Minds, or Congress of the Advanced Minds of the World. Sorry. So he thought he was like superior and he had more wisdom than everybody. And he revealed in his talk at this Congress that he was getting his ideas from the spirits of dead people that he was communicating with. And he described how he was using a Ouija board. He described that these dead people would tap on walls or tap on furniture to convey messages. And he goes into this big diatribe about how he's absolutely sure that they're dead people because of the way they talk and the ideas, and he knew them when they were alive. And of course, if you go to your Bible, that's an abomination, and you're not really talking to dead people. You're almost certainly talking to demons. So that is the origin of the government school system, not just in America, but in the world.
And, I don't think my audience, but many audiences would listeners understandably say, come on, right? But I find that there is something like that behind almost every major project that has had some deleterious or disastrous effects on a Christian culture or society or nation. And, back in the 1600s, when they started changing the words of the Bible, and I'm not going to go there, but the very people that were involved in that were communicating with, actually, this is not 1611 is the King James, and then fast forward to the 1800s, and the men that were involved in that, Westcott and Hort, were involved in the occult very, very deeply. I don't remember which was more than the other, but there were, in their letters, these are not things that Alex Newman is just making up, or Elizabeth Farah. These are in their letters, in their biographies, in their journals, in contemporary sources. This is the only reason that the American people don't know it is because, unlike, say, something like evolution, which is what has been pushed since the 1800s in American education, it's not the received knowledge, it's not the approved wisdom. And so it seems like it's so radical and weird and unthinkable that it's hard to believe. But it's absolutely, I've read every book on this, and you're talking about history that's in all kinds of books, and you brought it together in your new book. Say the name of the book again.
It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. And Elizabeth, this continues to this day, right? I can give you three very quick and very easy examples that anybody with an internet connection can verify for themselves. You don't have to go into the ancient libraries and dig out old dusty manuscripts. So the UN has what they call the World Core Curriculum, right? And you can find this right on the UN's website. They say it should be taught to every child in every school in every country. We have a chapter that deals with this in Crimes of the Educators as well. And the guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum, his name was Robert Mueller, no relation to the FBI guy who went after Donald Trump. But he is very, very open. In the teacher's manual, he's got a foreword in there, and he says that the underlying philosophy that underpins his whole understanding of education comes from the books of Alice Bailey and the Tibetan teacher Jabal Kul. And you know who Alice Bailey is, Elizabeth, but your average American doesn't realize.
The Theosophist Society, was that it? Oh my gosh,
the founder
they're
of the
satanic.
Lucifer, she founded the Lucifer Publishing Company, which continues to this day. It's now called the Lucis Trust because Lucifer Publishing was too obvious.
Yeah.
But she claimed to be communicating with what she called ascended masters. These were spiritual entities that she claimed were giving her secret knowledge and wisdom. I've actually got a bunch of her books in my library. They're crazy. She has one on education in the new age where she talks about we're creating a new species of human. The goal is a world federation or world government and a world brain. And she's getting all of this insight, she says, from this Tibetan which is what
It's
she describes as an
always
ascended master.
Indian, Tibetan, Nepalese. It's always in that area that this kind of thinking comes from as well.
That's right.
And
Yep.
England is very involved.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
like
England is one of the centers of this. Yep. And then more recently, we've had two huge developments that have come about. The first one is social emotional learning, which, by the way, is in virtually every school in America today, with the exception of some very good Christian schools. But the lady who's like the leading luminary here, her name is Professor Linda Lantieri, professor of education at Teachers College, Columbia University, most important college of education in the world by far. I've got her on video admitting that she's getting her ideas from she says, well, I don't want to say that she's passed because she comes to my council table every night. So let's just say she's interdimensional. So these spiritual entities are coming and giving her this insight on how to manipulate the attitudes, values, and even spirituality of children. And then you go back to the late 80s. Okay, this is the third example of just blatant occultism, blatant necromancy at the highest levels of the education system. George H.W. Bush hired a lady called Dr. Shirley McCoon to start working on basically the nationalization of American education. This was, again, back in the late 1980s. And he convened a national governor summit on education. This took place in Kansas. And one of the key speakers was this lady, Dr. Shirley McCoon. And she describes how, the new schools of the future, there's a social change function where they got to predict what's going to happen in the future and prepare the little ones in their care to exist in that future. She also wrote a book called The Light Shall Set You Free. And if you read the book, she says these insights were channeled from ascended masters who are giving her secret insights into the coming new age, the fifth dimension. So blatantly in your face, you don't have to go into the smoky rooms. They're telling you at this point that all this stuff is rooted in the occult. And, for a secular person, they say, well, okay, whatever, they're crazy. But for us as Christians, we say, well, no, the Bible clearly warns about this.
If they're crazy, Alex, they shouldn't be directing education or advising anybody on education. If they are as demonically inspired as they clearly are, then all the more so. Besides this demonic realm, it just goes way, way back. And when you look at England today and various other countries, but look at England, how it's self-destructed so quickly. And with such force. And some English people don't know whether they will be able to recover, but there is an awakening of citizens in England, in Ireland, in Spain, I just saw yesterday. So, of course, I'm referring to Islamism, but I think that with Islamism, or Islam is what I just prefer to look at it as, overtaking a system, we have to have destroyed the core of the system first, I believe. I was talking to Trevor Loudon yesterday, and I had him on to talk about Zoran Mandani and his run for mayor of New York, and we're not going to get there. But I was asking, go there, but I was asking him, the Marxism, is that just a ruse? But his parents were Marxists. Or the Islamism, is the Marxism just going to be used to burn the system to the ground? And then Marxism, like in London, which is now an Islamic city. It is not a British city anymore, has free reign. And I'm wondering if, and I wasn't thinking about this yesterday, Marxism has roots in satanic, and I don't know about necromancy or anything, but Marx was very much tied to satanic visions, as I recall, right? Marx.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his poetry is very clear on that. He's openly talking about his deal with Satan. It's not the words of somebody who truly believes that God is a fiction. So.
Right. And so he wasn't a real atheist because he was very spiritually minded, just in the satanic realm. And so I guess what I'm thinking is Christian America, or just even if you are not a professing Christian and you don't know the Lord, but you're an American, and you don't know that the reason we have what we have or did have is solely because the light of God through the scriptures and the faith of the founders and the faith of the Mayflower Compact and all the rest is the only thing that gave us what we have today. You could be kind of clueless about that, but you still want what you want because you know that it's good. Families are a good thing, and transgender is insanity, and you know all the basics. The rule of law, it's a good thing, even if you can't point back to your scriptures and discuss it that way. But we're surrounded by Marxists, and I wasn't even thinking about Satanists that are so connected through the UN and these organizations, individuals. I didn't know that lady. I don't think I've ever read anything about her. And George H.W. Bush, was it H.W.
Yep.
that was doing that?
Yep.
And then we have the Islamists or the Muslims that are here on a mission of their own. We're surrounded. We are surrounded.
Which means they can't run now, right? We got it right where we need them. It's true.
Yeah. What I'm concerned about, because I would love to continue going down this way. Oh, I was going to mention Woodrow Wilson. I'll paraphrase a quote from him that education was, the intent of education is to take the student as far away as he can from what his parents taught him. I think that was Woodrow Wilson. And he was an educator, and he happened to, unfortunately, be a president of the United States. And then there was John Dewey. This stuff is big names everywhere involved in this.
That's right. Yep. John Dewey was kind of the guy who really built what we call the modern public school system. He was the lifetime honorary chair of the National Education Association, the NEA. He really, more than anybody else, with his partnership with the Rockefeller dynasty, built this system that we call today the public school system. And his views on pretty much everything were very clear. He actually thought him and his buddies were starting a new religion. Speaking of doctrines of demons, right? They put together the Humanist Manifesto, and they thought they were creating a new religion where basically there is no real God. So that means I'm God and you're God, and that means there is no right, wrong.
That goes back to the Garden of Eden.
That's right. As Genesis chapter 3, right? We shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So that was his false religion from hell. And then the Supreme Court actually established that as the national religion of the United States in 1962 and 1963, when they kicked out Christianity, kicked out the Bible. They basically made this humanist religion the government-backed religion. They forced us to pay for it with our taxes, and they indoctrinated our children with it. And now we're seeing the fruit, right? Our society is falling apart. Our families are falling apart. Our churches are falling apart. Kids are killing themselves. Kids are killing each other. Kids are getting addicted to drugs. They're aborting your grandbabies. And this is all directly traceable to the fact that the government established a false religion and taught it to multiple generations of young Americans.
And what we also have is these other tangential issues that are big in and of themselves, and that is we are importing millions of people that do not have, nor do they want, because they actively reject it and disdain it, from Islam to Hinduism, which nobody wants to talk about because it seems mean, that we don't agree with every religion and think that America could be founded by Muslims or America could be founded by Islam or by Marxism. All of these things are being flooded into our country. And so we're soft. We don't know what we believe. Kids are bombarded with social media. And I started to watch a movie last night and had to turn it off because it was literally, it was that bad. I just said, turn it off. I didn't know what it was. And so they're being bombarded with this. And we've got so many other forces, but this immigration is being brought straight into the heart of America. And it's not easy to rewind once you've done something like that. And so that's what WorldNetDaily and myself, America First Immigration, we're talking a lot about. But now the ground is so barren that the seeds of the Word of God are not going to penetrate into the hearts of our children. They're barren. Their hearts are not cultivated by the Word of God as much as they should be. and is pervasively across the land. And then you've got other religions that are coming in that are going to profess to be the true answer. And so we're importing our own demise in so many other ways. So let's go to my immediate concern that I have literally, I hate to say the word agonized over, but I've been so worried about it. The Department of Labor, if I can't remember, I know it's in my Grok or ChatGPT where I've been doing some research, the billions of dollars. Do you happen to know what the Department of not Labor, Education, what their budget is?
Well, it depends on how you calculate it. The government is notoriously dishonest, so they divide it up into what they call discretionary spending and what they call mandatory spending. And once you add in the mandatory spending, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars when you include the the subsidies on the student loans, when you include Pell Grants and all of that kind of stuff, the grants to the state governments and everything. I think the last one I saw was in the neighborhood of $200 billion a year, but we can check that real quick.
The reason I ask is this. When I started to realize it seemed like I'm not detecting a plan. I'm detecting little side notes like, well, we should keep Pell because of, right? The Pell Grants. Well, we shouldn't do this. I mean, if they're still giving money to the higher education, well, to universities, they still have to manage that. You can't just say have the Department of Commerce manage it. You still have to manage if you're going to fund universities in any way, shape, or form. So there's going to be some residual positions and funding and activity that will, I suppose, have to be put into other departments if education is taken down. By the way, which I think will require actually an act of Congress. But this is my concern. What President Trump, who usually speaks in pretty broad, not very granular, detail-oriented statements, and then he can backtrack if he kind of gets it wrong, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it just sounds like, okay, we're going to shut it down, and we'll send it back to the states where it belongs. And I'm thinking, okay, my head just blew up, exploded. Send it back what? To the states that are every bit as guilty, as malignant or malign in their influence over our children. If the secretary and if President Trump and his advisors, policy advisors, don't know that they're still they're still doing transgender and DEI and anti-American history, and Palestinianism is like a core doctrine. If they don't know this, then I'm worried. What I was trying to do, and I spent hours on it, is figure out if he set a standard that the money that is sent to the states has to 100% be sent to parents who are either private or homeschooling. And of course, everybody freaks out about homeschooling because all these parents are going to be, in their mind, they're going to think that they're, welfare parents and on drugs and whatever, and they're just going to be blowing this money. But that could be prevented. I'm thinking, set a standard. We know the states can't educate, so send it to the parents. And if they refuse to allow homeschoolers and private schoolers to educate their children with government funds, then just withhold it. Minnesota, okay, you don't get any money. That's fine. You can do what you want. What do you think about this worry and about my solution?
Yeah, well, I think there's several key things to think about. In fact, if you look at the big, beautiful bill that passed out of the House of Representatives, there was actually a provision in there to allow taxpayers to divert some of their tax money into these, what they call scholarship granting organizations that would then do just what you described, grant scholarships to families for their children to go either to private schools or to homeschool. The big problem with that, as passed in the House, was that there was a lot of restrictions and regulations on that, and it would have basically federalized the policies of private schools in some really important respects, including the forcing them to obey the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, which would have bankrupted a lot of private schools, would have opened the door for Medicaid and the mental health establishment to come in.
Not good.
Yeah, so that's one of the major concerns. I would say, first of all, when you look at the U.S. Constitution, it has no reference at all to education. And so what I think, to me, that under the 10th Amendment means that is not a responsibility of the U.S. government at all.
Exactly.
And even though, we may like Trump, we may be happy that the Republicans are in charge of Congress now, realistically, we know there will come a day when Democrats will have Congress again, when Democrats will have the White House again, and then they will use all those levers, they will use all those funding streams to force everybody to obey them. So I think a much better interim step would be to just shut down the U.S. Department of Education, repeal all the federal statutes governing education and handing out money, and then start letting states deal with it as they see fit. And what I think will happen very quickly is states like California.
Money back, but send no money, no federal funding whatsoever to the school districts, because they get a lot of money right now.
Absolutely. Not one single penny, right? And you're right. About 10% of the government schools budgets comes from the feds. That should end immediately. There's no authority for the federal government to be providing that money. And it has been nothing but camp. And yeah, Trump's trying to use it for some good things now, trying to stop with the transgender and all that. But he's going to be president for another 3.5 years, right? Best case scenario. Best case scenario, we get another Republican president for another 4 years. But eventually a Democrat will come in and they'll do exactly what Joe Biden and Barack Obama did. They'll say, if you want the money, you got to promote the trans stuff. You got to let the boys and the girls through. You got to do
and we
things
need
that
to
are so
say
crazy
the
we can't even imagine.
Republicans are just, for instance, on the issue that I'm so focused on with H-1B and all of this importing labor to displace American workers and suppress their wages. Well, Republicans are some of the biggest spokespeople for that. I don't understand it. I think it's been a couple of decades of really creative lobbying, and they really actually believe that we're not smart enough, that we don't have enough smart people that are unemployed or in the wrong industry in order to fill the jobs. But we have, 41, 42 million people. They're not adults. They're not in the workforce. I think we could find some to fill those jobs. We do know that.
Oh, absolutely. And what it would do is cause wages to go up, which would be very good for the Americans at the lowest economic rungs. It's cruel to flood the country with a bunch of unskilled labor to drive low-skilled jobs' wages down. I mean, it's absolutely
listen, I'll tell you
cruel.
what the worst thing I'm finding now is that some of these jobs have really good salaries. I thought when I originally began my research on this and talking about it, that it was all cheap labor. It's not.
The tech job.
I mean, 180, 200, $250,000 a year. I just was researching last night on the H-1B database, and we're talking about really great salaries. So, but we have people like Ted Cruz and Ron Johnson, both of whom I like, and others that literally believe that they believe the propaganda. So I'm worried, even if Trump leaves office, I don't know that he can get anything done during this term, because we've got the Democrats that want to destroy America. We've got the Republicans that are clueless or just walking around like lemmings following them, and they think they have a different mind, but they don't. And then Trump leaves and it's going to continue. I think that you're right. We have to get it out. I thought the way Trump was speaking, though, Alex, is that he's going to send the money back. And I'm thinking billions of dollars going to California and Minnesota and New York. And I'm thinking this is insanity, because these states have, you talked about the rot being so deep that, you cannot live in the house anymore once the rot is taken out, the bottom of your house. Is he going to send money back? Do you know? Or is he going to shut it down and pay off a little bit of the debt?
Well, he's unfortunately limited by federal law in terms of what he can do. And so right now, what he's been talking about through his executive order and even in some of his public statements is they're going to be trying to redistribute a lot of the functions that are right now under the U.S. Department of Education and move them to other agencies, shut down any programs or spending streams that are not absolutely required under statutory law. And whatever's left, they're going to try to give that to the state governments.
But see, that's my point. Your plan is all well and good. That's the proper plan. We should rewind to Jimmy Carter and prevent that stupid law from ever being signed. We can't do that. Hence, our question about can the school districts be any better after these 40, 50 years of indoctrination or guiding by the federal government? Well, if they're not going to just shut this down and keep all the money in the federal government and spend it elsewhere, like you're saying, then money's going to go back. Can we do something? Can Americans do something to get in front of President Trump and the Secretary of Education and say, you're literally empowering California to do what they're doing, just more of it?
Yeah. Well, there is some of that going on already. The Trump administration and the U.S. Department of Education specifically have already announced that they are investigating a couple of the more radical Democrat states. Minnesota, California are both in the crosshairs. And the administration has said publicly that they will cut off federal funding for these states and their education systems, so-called, if they don't quit with the crazy. If they don't quit forcing men into girls' locker rooms and girls' sports. What Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, has said is that these are clear violations of some of the federal statutes that have been passed over the years, including no discrimination based on sex. So they're in big trouble. The state of California is very mad. The governor and a lot of the legislative leaders have protested. They say they're getting ready to file lawsuits, but it looks like the Trump administration, and he's going after Maine as well, as another state that right now is under federal investigation for the trans stuff. So that's all well and good. But just like we saw after the 2020 election, if you want to call it that, it took all of 2 days for the next president to reverse everything with a pen. So we've got to put these changes into federal law if we hope to have them sustainable. And we've got to have states also saying we're not going to participate in this anymore.
One of the goals that President Trump should have is to, in whatever decision he makes, and the Secretary of Education as well, and what they can persuade Congress to do, is to empower homeschoolers and private schoolers and sort of disperse the responsibility, all of the tax dollars on a local, state, and federal level that are taken from homeschoolers and private schoolers. But I'm thinking mostly about homeschoolers because I was a homeschooler when I had kids at home, and given to the government school systems that are destroying the children there. And I know that a lot of homeschoolers don't want money because strings attach. But I think that the more money that, and maybe I'm off base here, maybe you would just say, Elizabeth, you don't want to go that direction. But if the federal government is going to end up continuing to have money that they're going to be sending back to the states, sure, it's great to be able to say, don't do DEI, don't do any transgender craziness, don't do story hours with, men dressed up as women. Great. But what about a positive thing of saying, can you imagine you've got six kids or five?
I have 6 so far.
Okay. A lot of people in your situation and mine formerly, if mom could stay home, not work, and have, like, say, about a median expenditure per child in the United States is, say, 10, 11, 12,000. If you gave homeschool families 10,000 for every student, it would have to be regulated. It really would be. You can't go on vacations to Hawaii for it, even if there are great science experiments that you could do there. But if it was regulated and audited, what if you had $50,000, $60,000? Your wife did not have to work, and I'm not saying she works now, but all these moms could stay home because they've got $30,000 from their 3 kids, and they could spend that money on education. Do you see how it funds itself? And then, by the way, so many moms and dads hire tutors for specialty things. I see a whole resurgence, or maybe it's not a resurgence, but a blossoming of a new industry of tutoring that becomes a great industry, because tens or hundreds of thousands of people who are skilled, intelligent, and would love to do something with their time would become private tutors for all these people. I could just see what it could be used for is making the free market education explode in quality. But if he sends those billions back.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, Elizabeth. My big concern, and part of my concern is because I've actually seen the documents and I've seen the plan, and I'll try to articulate this quickly. So my first introduction to this was in Sweden. I was living in Sweden when the school choice trap closed. Right, the government had started giving free money, public money, government money to all the private schools in the kingdom, with the exception of the one where the aristocrats sent their kids. And then in 2010, and I actually did some articles about all this for WND back then. The trap closed, and they said, now if you take the money, you now must teach the government curriculum. No Bibles allowed in the school.